Hello everyone, welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 1350 of our daily content grind. Today is another Patreon request that we are fulfilling. This one has been waiting quite a while, and if I'm going to be completely honest, it's because there's really not a whole lot to talk about with the topic, but we're going to try. We're going to try because I do want to honor all of the Patreon requests that have been waiting very patiently. And this one requested specifically to go into the backstory and the history of the Junkions, and more, in the planet Junk itself as well. So you should know this by now. In G1, this was the planet that they ended up in the '86 movie. Just basically a floating heap of trash that has gathered stuff from all over the universe into one gigantic garbage pile. It is here where the the Junkions live. We'll get into Quints later. This is where the Junkions live. They are a race of Transformers that seems to thrive in the garbage, using it to not only repair themselves constantly, but also develop their own bodies into being entirely recyclable and repairable with just whatever they have lying around. It's actually kind of fascinating. So you would think there would be some interesting backstory as to how these Transformers ended up on this floating pile of scrap heaps. And, yeah, we can kind of explore that here a little bit. Let's go into its main denizen, the one we know Junkions and the planet Junk for, Regar, their leader. So Regar himself is just more of a fun character. He was the meme lord before memes were a thing, because all he did was talk in references. Oh, hey, everyone on the internet knows someone like that now. The only thing they know how to do is speak and talk in references. So that's exactly what he did. And it's all timey television references, but hey, he can speak. You can figure out what he wants to say, so that is at the very least. Other than that, he comes off as kind of a goofball, which I guess is kind of why Weird Al was the choice for Transformers animated version. Which, by the way, we'll be speaking of that one because it really has nothing to do with any previous iteration of Regar, the Junkions. But the truth is, if you look at him in the series, Regar's just kind of a dude, like the concept of the character is mostly just a joke idea. What if we have this kind of junk obsessed Transformer who just talks in TV quotes? And that's really as far as he goes. He joins the Autobots for a few quests, but that's about it, and we only see the planet Junk like a couple times throughout the entire series, like in Five Faces of Darkness, and then in the big broadcast of 2006. Beyond that, like Regar and the planet really don't get a whole lot of exposure. So we never really find out a lot about him or the planet. Truth is, for a long time, we didn't even know whether or not they counted as Transformers, since they were a separate race that existed off Cybertron and had no affiliations whatsoever. We'd seen off-world Transformers before, but they had affiliations. Wheelie bore an Autobot symbol in the '86 movie, even though he was kind of this refugee on Quintessa. We had things like, what's the other example? DevCon. DevCon was a lone agent, wasn't on Cybertron or Earth, but he identified as an Autobot. Even after aligning with the Autobots, Regar never wore an Autobot symbol, not in G1. So that kind of leaves him as this little mystery space. They did later confirm, yes, they are an offshoot of Transformers. They're an ancient race of Transformers that kind of just left the planet at some point. Okay, we'll work with that. But cartoon-wise, that's pretty much it. And the Japanese continuity didn't really do a whole lot to fix that. If we go to the Marvel continuity, there is the adaptation of the movie where events play mostly the same. I'll tell you the big difference later on. But for the most part, Regar's role is exactly the way it was in the '86 movie. And that's about it. This is the only time Regar would actually appear in the Marvel American run, and it's in a story that is debatably canonical. At the very least, it's not part of the main run of 80 issues. No, if we want to see stories with Regar, we have to go to the Marvel UK run, where, yeah, they made liberal use of all those characters who did not get included anywhere else. And we have time travel story shenanigans in order to get Regar into the current day. Regar, in that continuity, is actually the reason why Bumblebee got rebuilt into Goldbug. He's the one who did it after finding a destroyed Bumblebee on Earth. Time travel shenanigans go on. They're trying to figure, like there's a scheme to try and get all the Transformers who came from the future to stay on Earth. Doesn't work out. Everyone goes back to where they're supposed to be, which is well and good, except for the futuristic Galvatron, which is how we get Megatron and Galvatron coexisting, even in the Marvel American run. But yeah, like, that's pretty much it for Regar. Like, you do see the planet Junk. After this time travel thing, he does go back to Junk. He finds Unicron trying to use it for his new body. They stop that from happening. It's pretty much your lot. There's a few other stories here and there, but they don't really expand on a history of Regar, Junkions, the planet Junk, or anything. So I have to go for other continuities, and I have to see if anyone else actually tell the story of the planet Junk and the Junkions. We'll check Dreamwave. We almost never do that on this channel, but sometimes if you're desperate, you have to go to whatever you can get. Regar did appear in a far more malevolent version of Regar, by the way, who willingly rebuilt Megatron, apparently knowing full well who he was. Yeah, and this was Regar. It wasn't on Junk. This was kind of just he came. I want to say he came across Megatron in space, picked him up in a ship, and then repaired him there. Could be mistaken. Dreamwave has been a long time ago, so you'll excuse me if the gray matter does not want to remember Pat Lee's anything. This Regar was literally short-lived. After being repaired and after getting caught up, Megatron just killed his savior. Because that's what Megatron does. Honestly, if we want a Regar that actually has some meat and substance to him, we have to go to IDW, which is true of a lot of Transformers, I find. It's like the least used ends up getting, ends up flourishing in IDW. So, in this one, the Junkions take a lot of different roles they haven't had before. So, the ones in this universe are mostly spacefaring. They are junk traders who travel the universe rather than sit on one single planet. And you have this leadership that is both Regar and his consort, let's say, Ramaj, who is based on Nancy, the female Junkion you saw earlier in this video. For the most part, they play something as a minor antagonist. They do try to invade Earth at one point, but eventually get beaten into standing down and then ending up aligning with the Autobots, which gives us Regar where he's supposed to be. Granted, he's mostly just ahead at that point, but at the very least, it's where they were. The backstory to them, however, does give you a little bit more. So this is the only universe where Junkion actually has something of a backstory. See, the planet used to be, a thriving world, but the inhabitants, the robotic Transformer inhabitants, apparently, were just completely reckless with their resources to the point where they bled the planet dry. And whatever they had done in that time to bleed the planet dry meant that the planet's magnetic field got strong enough to start pulling junk in from all over the universe, eventually turning it into the Junkion we know and love. So rather than just a scrap floating around, in space, it is an actual planet. We found this out when Megatron came here. So the only time we had heard about, Junkion in IDW universe, as far as the main Transformers, Cybertron itself goes, was thought to be something of a myth and legend, and those who did know of it spoke of cannibalistic creatures that roam the planet, and how just like disastrously dangerous the place was. This was all entirely correct. The surviving denizens of the planet Junk have resorted to scavenging and cannibalism in order to survive. Lovely, right? But that means that Megatron basically gets a field day blowing things up until he runs across this Quintesson you see him dragging here, who tells him how to leave the planet. Megatron then kills the Quintesson. Are you sensing a pattern here? Megatron doesn't like to be helped. I think he takes offense anyone tries to actually assist him with something. The other noteworthy element of Junk is that the planet was whole for a while, and then came the Junkon War, where it became the site of a minor skirmish between Autobots and Decepticons, which mostly came down to Prowl versus Shockwave, the tactician versus the man of logic. This, yeah, in the terms of IDW storytelling, this is a really good pairing to pit against each other. I actually like this a lot. Now, granted, eventually the battle ended with the planet being detonated, which is probably why you don't hear much of the planet Junk after this. I should point out, the Megatron story happens in the past. This one's much closer to the present, hence why we have wayfaring Junkions rather than dwelling on Junk. So, there you go. But again, beyond all this, there's some backstory there, but it is very simplistic. As far as G1 goes, as far as the original version of Junk and the Junkions go, you don't really have a lot to work off of here. They don't really go into the backstory in the comic books or the cartoon. They don't explain why there's just this particularly strong magnetic field pulling garbage from all over the universe into this one solid pile. They have things like the planet's goo, which there are apparently more than 8,000 of, that is just like a garbage accumulator in and of itself. That seems to be I keep saying Quintesson. That seems to be Junkion related. And the Quintesson journal does get found on Junkion. We don't know if the planet Junk just pulled that in or if it was just part of that. So Junkion could be something of the Quintesson's dumping ground as well. In other fictions, Sharkticons are known to inhabit Junk, so you play into that as well. So there might be Junkion connections with the Quintessons. We don't know. It's a very loosely connected thread here. About the only thing interesting and different this planet ever did was in the Marvel movie adaptation, where they just turned the whole planet into a spaceship and flew that to go fight Unicron. So yeah, this was actually the original intent. The original script actually called for the planet of Junkion to turn into the jet that they used to fly off to the final battle with Unicron. Somewhere along the line, that got changed into just a scrap heap looking spaceship, and then along with the spiral ship of the Quintesson. But there's just a slight amount left. There's a slight amount left in the original 86 movie. If you watch the scene where Regar is summoning their spaceship, you can hear him talking about the planet Junkion itself, not specifically something from Junkion. Now, the way it's phrased actually does make it seem like it's the model of the ship. Almost as if it's talking like a car dealership, which is the line that they're going for. But that said, it wasn't the original intent. Originally, it was supposed to be the entire planet transforming. So, little bit left over. The Marvel comic depicted it the way it was originally imagined. But again, that just kind of leaves more mystery. So this thing is also potentially a ship that attracts junk? Okay. Like I feel like they just like inhabited a big space cleaner, like just a magnet flies around space and cleans up just open void for eternity, and then just builds into this. That could have been a good backstory, by the way. You know, like it is like a garbage scow spaceship that you know these Transformers travel the universe in, and when it just collected too much and got too heavy, they just kind of had to settle wherever junk started floating. Could work. Could work. No. See, if we want to come up with some kind of like story behind why Junkion exists and what it exactly is, there are things that we can connect. There are threads that we can tie together. And I'm not the first one to come up with these theories, but I like to share them when I can. Let's take a look at the planet Cybertron briefly, shall we? And I want you to look not at the bright orange core that commands your attention whenever this design comes up. It does lead all the way down into the center of the planet, so it is very appealing. I need you to look at the lower right quadrant. I need you to look at that because that's not rounded like the rest of the planet. That's a lot of scrap and shrapnel. That's just tendrils of metal just loosely hanging on to the side of that planet. That is the great gash of the planet Cybertron. And just as Junkion has no concrete origin story, neither does the fact that Cybertron is missing an enormous hunk of itself. So, imagine with me, if you will, what if, per se, the planet Junk, or at the very least, the core of the planet Junk, actually is the missing wedge of Cybertron? What if, in the times of the ancient wars, you had a situation, let's say, just to work in all the angles here, what if you had like a massive field of just factories and repair stations and scrap yards that were just like an entire section of the planet that was devoted to just building and recycling spare parts for the rest of Cybertron, because obviously damage is going to happen, war-based or not. So it's almost like a medical section. You know, what we would think of as a junkyard becomes a medical section when you're a giant robot. If this was Autobot controlled, this could be Autobot or Decepticon controlled. But if the goal here, if the solution to this plan was to actually detonate it, and actually, instead of just trying to wipe out every factory and every Autobot that was running the factories, what if you just take out the entire section? Like it's a Sector 7 thing, just take the whole thing out. So you have that literally blasted free from the planet. There's your Junkion. There is your Junkion. You could be just simple gravitational pull from a junk pile floating through space that causes all this trash from the universe to accumulate there. And any of the Transformers who are on the planet Junk, the Junkions themselves, might be descendant from whatever ancient Transformers were on the planet at the time. We know these guys existed in ancient times on Cybertron. Now, the real reason is because the animators just had those models left over, so they decided to reuse them for the flashback. But we have to take what we see on screen as definitive canon. And as a canonical thing, yeah, Junkions existed on Cybertron, or at least a form of Junkion existed on Cybertron in the ancient pre-Megatron days. So if one of Megatron's acts was to literally blow a section of the planet off because it was too beneficial to the Autobots, I can see all those survivors doing exactly what Junkions needed to do: scrap and salvage in order to survive. And we know from Five Faces of Darkness, same episode as this shot, by the way, those types of Junkions do still exist. So yeah, what if? What if that is just the missing chunk of Cybertron? Seems like a solid idea for me. No one's ever explored it. It is still just a weird thing. And junk is just kind of treated as its own thing now. So we don't ever really get anyone who's willing to go, let's explore that idea, shall we? Now, that's not to say Junkions are devoid of development. Obviously, in recent years, we have really changed up the idea of what a Junkion can be. Not only detritus, but also we have things like this, you know, the Iser style Junkions, who come in all shapes and sizes. So now we've diversified what a Junkion can be. They don't all have to be retools and repaints of Regar. We can come up with new things too, and that's fun to actually get to have. But that's all I got for you. I wish there was some like deep lore as to why the writers created the planet, but nothing that I found actually led to that. I wish that Regar and the Junkions themselves had some big secret as to why these Transformers existed on a separate trash pile of a world. I don't. It's just kind of how it is. So take it for what you will. It's just kind of a rundown of all the iterations of Regar and the planet Junk. Granted, like I said, not a whole lot, but it's what I can do. So I hope that's good enough. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for watching. I will see you next time.
Hello everyone, I am Astral Agent Magnetar, a Tokusatsu VTuber, and I am streaming 4 times a week over on Twitch, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday afternoons, and a special late night one on late Friday/early Saturday. So come watch, come hang out, and let's make an impact together.